Welcome to Thunder Nerds. I'm Brian Hinton.
I'm Janelle Pizarro.
And I'm Frederick Philip von Weiss, and thank you for consuming the Thunder Nerds, a conversation with the people behind the technology
that love what they do
and do tech good.
Doing tech. Never on the left because my right's my good ear. Thank you, everybody, for joining the show. Super appreciate you spending a Saturday afternoon with us, depending on what side of the pond you're at, and we'll get to that with our guest. And just want to say, everybody, if you can, please go to the old YouTube and subscribe. Hit the notification button. We're at youtube.com/C/ThunderNerds. C for channel. Super appreciate it. We're at, I think, 240 now, and we get about another 60 subscribers. Brian will be released from his, well, I don't even want to talk about it, but we're also, please go to the old iTunes.
It's always me.
Huh?
It's always me.
It is always you. Brian's parole. I wasn't going to bring it up, but anyway, go to the old iTunes and subscribe there and give us a review on iTunes. Go to thundernerds.io/review and give us a review, and we'll read it on the show. And speaking of which,
I have a review to read by M. Herbert 15. That's titled "Good Conversations with Industry Leaders." Thunder Nerds continues to have great content, and a diverse selection of industry leaders on their program. Always a fun, engaging listen. We'll continue to follow them as they progress. That's fantastic. Thank you, M. Herbert.
M.
Herbert 15.
Yeah.
Matt, thank you so much, Matt.
Is it Matt?
I looked it up, Matt. It's a Matt we know, yeah.
Oh, hello.
Hi, Matt. Thanks for listening. Really appreciate it. Matt reached out to us before, so thank you. Well, let's go ahead and welcome our guest. We have a super amazing guest from across the pond, which is in a completely different time zone. We have designer, author, co-founder, and designer of Indie, Laura Kalbag. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Really appreciate you joining us. What is it? It's 5 hours difference, I believe. So you're at 6 p.m.?
Yes, 6 p.m. So it's a nice time.
Oh, wow.
It'll probably start getting dark while we're talking, I reckon.
Yay! How's it feel over there? Like you're in Ireland?
I am. I'm in the southeast of Ireland, so near Cork.
Oh my goodness. Okay, so you have to tell us a little bit about that because we're super American and we have no idea. And we don't travel because we're terrible. So,
well, and people might be confused because I have a very British accent because I'm a very British person, so I'm not Irish.
But tell us about it. Like, tell us about what is it like being over there?
I've been living here for about 7 months now, and before that, we were living in Sweden for 2 years, and before that, I just lived in the UK my whole life. And Ireland is really nice. It's really green. The culture and the weather is mostly similar to the UK, except there's quite a lot of stuff that's similar to the US there because a lot of US culture came from Ireland. So there's also things that I think, oh, this is really American. And then I'm like, actually, it's probably really Irish. And it just originated there. The portion sizes, the kinds of food that's very popular here. Very American. I mean, to be fair, I've only been to the US once, and that was to Vegas. So that's maybe not a typical US experience.
No. Vegas.
It's the quintessential US experience.
Yeah, in some ways, the most extreme version of the US in a lot of ways.
Yeah, definitely. So how did you come about or landing in Ireland? Like, what was your journey from, you said Sweden to Ireland?
So we were trying to look for a good place to live. So I don't know if you folks have heard about this wonderful thing called Brexit, but essentially my partner and I are all, and we run Indie together, and we are together. And when the current government in the UK got elected, we kind of had an inkling that something was going to happen like Brexit. They've been talking about it. And the thing is that we are... I'm a British citizen, he's a French citizen. And so the potential is that when Brexit happens, we end up on the wrong side of the border from each other. And also we have things like a lot of the the surveillance bills in the UK were possibly going to become a legal issue if you're working in privacy like we are and working on building software that's private. And so we had to look for a country that might be a bit more friendly to that as well. I mean, to be honest, not many countries are very friendly towards your privacy nowadays. But we tried to find somewhere we could settle in the EU for as long as I had the ability to choose where I wanted to live in the EU. Because when Brexit happens, I will no longer have that choice either. So it's tricky. It's a tricky thing.
How does it work right now then? Like wherever you decide to settle, like if you're in Ireland now, you can just say, okay, when it happens, you're like, I'm going to be here. Is that? Yeah.
Do you become are you going to look to become a citizen?
I should be able to survive as a British citizen here because
it's part of the
Ireland
UK.
used to be, well, the north of Ireland is part of the UK, very northern Ireland. The rest of Ireland is a republic, and it has been for quite a while now. But previously to that, it was one of the many countries that the Brits decided to take for their own, and they got it back. But it actually means that I still have pretty much the same rights as an Irish citizen, as a British citizen here. And my partner has the same rights as a European citizen here because it's part of the European Union. So it's all very complicated.
Nightmare.
Wow.
Yeah, it must be a nightmare for you guys.
Mm-hmm.
And you guys have been doing freelance together for a long time, right? Like that's been your only gig?
Yeah, well, we're not so much freelance in that we make our own products. So we've been doing that for the last few years. And prior to that, we were both freelance. But yeah, we've been doing this for about, I'd say 4 or 5 years. I've been doing it full time for about 4 years because we could only really afford for one of us to be working on it full time for a long time. And it's still touch and go sometimes. But right now we can sustain both of us working full time on stuff at Indie.
That's awesome to be able to be like working with your partner. Like how cool is that? Or what are the difficulties of like working with your partner?
That there is never any end to work. That it's very easy to work all the time because work is at home, and so it can be quite hard to escape that. I keep very strict schedule, so I don't work weekends and I don't work in the evenings unless there's like a deadline or something like that. So that helps. I've always been very disciplined, and because I've always worked for myself since I left university, so I had to learn how to be very disciplined. Otherwise, I'd never get any work done and I'd never get paid.
It's good to have that balance.
Yeah, I think so. And otherwise, I don't know what my mental health would be like if I didn't take time to myself and gotta get out and do other things rather than looking at computers.
So what was the inspiration for you guys to start Indie then?
It was when the Snowden revelations came out. So when the Snowden revelations came out, a lot of people were worried because Edward Snowden. Our governments are spying on us, all of that. And one of the things that we were thinking about was actually that while a lot of people are very rightly concerned about government surveillance, what we noticed was the role of the companies on the internet, on the web, and how they were actually supplying all of the surveillance because all of these corporations were recording what we were doing, and that's how the government got hold of it. And it's just because that's how social media is architected. It's in a way that's very easy for the governments to say, oh, well, now you have to hand all that over to us. And whether that's your original intention or not. And so we said, well, this is awful that corporations have such a role in it. And so what can we do to try to fight that? What can we do to try to build things that don't spy on you by default?
Yeah, so what is the product? Oh.
What's wrong?
I think she's echoing.
Sorry, I feel like, I'm having an echo, real fun. So I was like, what's going on? So what is it that Indie does make, and what do you guys actually have to offer people in the world?
So we do 3 things is how we try to focus on it. So if we say this, the problem that we're trying to work on is the problem of what we call surveillance capitalism. which is a term coined by Shoshana Zuboff. And what that is essentially that the mainstream technology, its business model, is to look at what we're doing, to profile us, and to use that information to either sell on to other people, to give to governments, or just to use to sell advertising and to advertise to us better, as they say. So how do we fight that? We have to do it in 3 different ways. One, we have to try to encourage effective regulation against the companies that are doing this. We have to try to stop them from doing things that are very harmful and can really harm vulnerable people. So we go and give talks about that and try to educate people about that and talk to the European Union about that and things like that. We don't really have much sway in the US, that's for sure. And then the other thing we do is we try to regulate it technologically. So we've got 2 apps, Better for iOS and Better for Mac. And what those do is if you use Safari, they block all the trackers we can find and protect you in Safari. So that's our way of doing it technologically. But one of the biggest problems is that you can tell someone, oh, don't use Facebook because they're profiling you. You can tell someone, don't use Google because they're profiling you. But what are the alternatives? And there are some alternatives, but there aren't that many. So really our primary goal is to work on building alternatives. So we'll be doing lots of research in the area, building prototypes in the area, trying to work out the best way of doing it. Because the thing is, so much of mainstream technology has been architected around the model of collecting all the information of your users on a server. And that is pretty much the way that most technology works. And that in itself is a risk in terms of people's privacy and in terms of security. Like, if all that information is on one server somewhere, it is easy to access and it's vulnerable. And so we've been working on ways that we can architect technology that doesn't require that isn't all stored on one server. Ways that we can socialize with each other and do all the things that we do now, but without having to rely on big corporations who monetize us.
I imagine that big corporations are the ones probably coming to you as well for solutions like, hey, this is great, we need this, we're looking for any kind of privacy, security that we could get our hands on.
No, not in the slightest.
Really?
Oh, no, what they're wanting to do is go, shh, don't tell people what we're up to. We don't want you to talk about that stuff. We want to reframe privacy as being, oh, your direct messages are private because the only people that can see them are you, your friend, and us. And that means it's private. And so you see you've got the privacy dinosaur that Facebook has and all these things. So many companies now saying your privacy is important to us. And the thing is, they're not offering solutions that are private from them.
What about, I think maybe what Frederick was going at was like businesses, like a corporation that's not gathering data, wanting to protect the privacy of their employees. Like, do you get approached at all from that angle?
I think that is a lot of people that are working in the area. That's probably their main way to make money, would be things like trying to prevent corporate espionage and things like that, kind of keeping their stuff private. But I'd say that because what we're working on is we're not trying to make things for companies. We're trying to make things for people, for mainstream people. Because the thing is, we're the ones that need protecting. Like, I mean, sure, I care about people who are employees, but what do I think about what are those companies doing? Is that something I care about? Maybe, maybe not. What I really care about is individuals. I really care about the people in the world who are most vulnerable to losing their privacy. Maybe people who are gay, people who are seeking asylum, people who are in a country where that country's government doesn't believe they have a right to be there. And we've seen technology be used against these people time and time again, being used against protesters. And so I want to build technology and infrastructure that people can use where they are safe and they can communicate with their friends and they can organize protests and they can live their lives safely, where technology isn't a risk to them. Or
do you have any kind of businesses that want to get on board with this, though? I mean, I imagine there's some people that want to align with this movement and be part of it.
Yeah, I mean, people-wise, lots of people are interested in this. There's a big movement around federation. So there's this alternative to Twitter called Mastodon. And the whole idea behind Mastodon is essentially you have your own Twitter. And so you can post things, but it's on your own site and or hosted by someone else, although it's better if it's on your own site. And though all of those different Twitters can communicate with each other. And this is what they call federation. So it's a really cool technology. And that's got a lot of potential in that we maintain ownership and control over all of our own content to begin with. And then we can build more things on top of that. Think about us all having our own little social medias. We can decide who's on our Facebook and who, like our version of Facebook, and who can see our messages and who sees what we're posting. And a lot of what Mastodon and what they're doing with Mastodon is that they're building it with the defaults that you don't get from the companies that have an interest in knowing everything about you. So they're really building in great anti-abuse tools. They're building in lots of stuff that's private by default. Like by default, people can't search what you toot, as they call it, on Mastodon. Unless you put a hashtag in it, and they can search that hashtag, because they're thinking, well, by default, actually, when people search for things on, say, Twitter, a lot of the time they're searching for a particular term that makes them angry so that they can pile onto a person. And so let's not have that in Mastodon, because then people can't pile onto each other. Maybe let's not list by default in the timeline how many likes, favorites, a message has, how many retweets or boosts, as they call it on Mastodon, have, because actually that encourages us to get more addicted to technology. That encourages us to sort of get hooked on this, how popular can I be? How meme worthy am I? And so there's a lot of really clever design going on. I mean, it's not perfect. No solution's going to be perfect, but there is a lot of thought going into how can we make things different, because it doesn't have the same business model as the rest of social media, where the business model is they want you there all the time. They want you to engage as much as possible. They want your attention. And that's why we hear a lot of people talking about trying to build things for attention, trying to build engagement. But actually, if we think about technology's role in our lives, we don't want it always wanting our attention. We don't want to always be engaged with it. We want to be engaged with our friends and family. We want to be able to spend time doing stuff away from screens. So I think it's a positive movement in design.
I think that's really cool that you were able to that there's such a thing as Mastodon, especially like when you just called it like privacy dinosaur. I just think it's pretty hilarious. Not same era, but still kind of cool. But yeah, I think that also seems to be very popular right now among developers and designers even, is the whole concept of, we're completely hooked on technology. How do we design and develop to kind of get yourself away from technology, but still making it the best experience possible, so that you're using it to enhance your life rather than to consume your life. So what are your feelings about that?
One of the problems I have with the area is that a lot of the time we're kind of victim blaming, because a lot of us are victims of technology that's deliberately designed to addict us. It's deliberately designed to get our eyeballs all the time. I mean, Infinite Scroll is a classic example of that. Everyone loves Infinite Scroll because people know once you're in, you're stuck. And they've very much done that on purpose. And we can talk all day about like what's great ways to design things to make them less addictive. But the thing is, unless the business model underlying that technology is not around addicting us. So unless that business model is some way designed that they can make money and sustain their business without having to have us there all the time, then very few people are going to be able to design that into their technology. Because a lot of designers and developers, as much as they want to do the right thing, they don't have the ability to do so because they are designing to avoid addiction is the opposite of what their bosses and their managers want them to do.
Yeah, good, very good point. I want to circle back. You said at the initial when you started this conversation about surveillance capitalism. I love that term, by the way. You said there are three things that India addresses, and one of them is surveillance capitalism. I'm curious what the other two are.
Well, the three things we're trying to do is to fight surveillance capitalism. So what we're doing is we're trying to promote regulation and trying to just encourage people to design things that are properly private. We regulate ourselves through what we call technological regulation by blocking the trackers as much as we can, and then build alternatives. So those are the three things that we try to do.
Okay, great. Thank you. I'm curious about Brave, exactly, not Brave, Better, how exactly it works. Like how are you knowing what to block exactly? Where are you getting that information?
Okay. So we're one of the reasons we started Better in the first place was because we looked at a lot of the other ad blockers and we didn't like what they were doing, because one of the things they were doing was a lot of them were blocking ads, but they were offering to unblock ads if you'd pay them a lot of money. So that's a very common model of one of the biggest ad blockers is the big companies like Google, they just pay them a load of money and they don't get blocked. And also that the focus was on ads, because actually ads aren't inherently bad. Like a picture of a thing you might want to buy, a link, not a problem. What the real problem is the underlying tracking behind those ads, the behavioral tracking that does things like make an ad follow you around all the different websites you're on.
Retargeting.
Because retargeting. Like the people behind the advertising company, by putting those ads on all those sites, they're seeing what you're doing and where you're visiting, and they're creating quite a developed picture about you, from where you go, what you do, what times of day you're there, the location information, your browser information, your device information. They can build up quite sort of detailed profiles about you, which can also be wrong, which is harmful in its own way. And then they can sell that data on, or they can use it to target you with other advertising as well.
Yeah, it's crazy. Oh, no,
sorry.
It's okay.
Bless you. What? Did you have something?
Oh, no, I guess I was just kind of like commenting. Target, for example, can predict when a woman is going to is pregnant by the things that she buys, which is terrifying, right? Like it's like 3 weeks before she even knows that she's pregnant. That's super horrifying.
I remember hearing that.
And they really should let her know that she's pregnant. Jeez.
So congratulations.
They know. Yeah.
One of the examples I give in my talks is when my mum died 3 years ago, and you don't share that stuff on social media right away because you don't want anyone to find out via social media. But the next day I started getting ads in my feed for funeral directors. And I was like, why is this happening? And I know it doesn't come from nowhere. And so I asked my siblings about it, and my sister said, oh yeah, sorry, I told my friend via private message, because she's in Australia, and Facebook must have just seen that. They may not have done it that way. There are other ways. I don't think I was looking at any funeral director sites, but perhaps someone I knew was looking at sites for funeral flowers or something like that, and perhaps but if they had a Facebook like button on there, that could track them. So that could be how they found out. So I don't know exactly how they did it. But it is a real example of how I knew that it was very unlikely I'd get that information anyway, because the rest of the time I get the stuff that most women in their early 30s get: makeup, dresses, washing powder, pregnancy tests, stuff like that.
That's it.
Occasionally I'll get stuff about like getting married, or the stuff they expect us to be doing.
Yeah.
Now I'm curious though, on the other side of the coin. I mean, we're talking about the negative aspects of this, but as a consumer, there is at a certain level a a benefit to this, as in I'm looking for, I don't know, a
Sunglasses.
desk. I want, or sunglasses. I'm looking for, well, I want a desk and stuff.
Or a meatloaf recipe. A very specific meatloaf recipe.
From Alta Brown.
Exactly. And to then get, I guess, insight into other things as I'm browsing and saying, "Oh, hey, I didn't know about this company." That there's a certain
value add.
Yeah, there's certain appeal and value add, as Frederick said, to that. I mean, what would you say in response to that?
There's two sides to that.
Yeah.
I mean, my initial response when people say this is usually, yeah, but do you want to be defined as a consumer? And is it worth knowing that you're potentially being manipulated into buying something you don't necessarily want or need? I don't know about you, but I have no will whatsoever. If I see something cool that I like on the web, out comes the money. There it is. I've got no more money till the rest of the month.
Start sending
I have
you
no ability
links
to restrain myself whatsoever. But also the other side, we can still have these advantages and this technology. There's no reason why we shouldn't have things that are really like great ways of finding out the stuff that we want by observing our behavior. It's just that information should all remain on our device. So all of that profiling and all that information about us, if that was kept on our device, which is something that Apple says it's been doing in terms of trying to separate itself from Google. It's they do a lot of their AI stuff on the device. And the idea being, Apple doesn't have that information about you, but you can still reap the benefits of having things watching what you're doing and going, oh, this is when you've got a calendar appointment. This is where you go every day. This is where you parked your car. And knowing all that stuff about you and being able to use it in a way that is useful to you without costing you anything. Aside from obviously lots of money, because Apple devices are very expensive.
Well, I mean,
sorry, go ahead, Brian.
I just along the same vein. Sorry, Frederick. But what about, we did the example of Target, where sending out, hey, you should get this because you're pregnant and you're going to know in 3 weeks. What do you say to companies that, I mean, how do they, in this world of technology where we live on these phones, and we live on our computers, and that's not going to change anytime soon. What can companies do in order to reap the benefits without invading privacy? Like what are some approaches that you believe would be a good way?
I really think the one thing we have to do is change the business models, is find alternative business models. This is the thing we've seen through Silicon Valley for a long time, is that a lot of these companies, they get a huge amount of venture capital with the idea that there will be a massive rapid growth and a big return on that. And so everyone who invested will get loads of money back. However, this often comes with the issue that the people who started out, they thought they were just building a cool thing. They weren't necessarily thinking about how it would be financially sustainable, aside from the fact that, some angel investor might throw a ton of money at us. And so they haven't necessarily thought about how to make something really long-term financially sustainable. And so what happens is, what's the thing that they all have that they can make money from? Well, it's the users. If they've grown fast enough, they've got users, somehow they can make money from adverts or profiling or something like that. And so that's why we're seeing a lot of these things. I don't necessarily believe that the people starting out building this technology are doing so for nefarious purposes and that they want to be evil. But they've accidentally walked themselves into a situation they have no choice but to invade people's privacy. And so if we think about different ways of funding things, one of the examples you see a lot now is things like Patreon, where the people who can afford stuff often help support the people producing cool content. That's a pretty cool model. That doesn't require knowing what anyone's doing. It just requires people signing up and saying, oh, that's cool. And so that's a pretty nice model. I mean, really, if we think about it, the amount we're using social media, it's our new modern infrastructure. Now, we probably use it more than we use a road, more than we use the emergency services, a lot of us, more than we use water. All these things that we actually pay taxes for, we pay local subsidies for. I mean, could there be a way that the technology is funded from the commons in some way, whether it's funded by taxes or something like that. I don't know exactly what the options are, but we've worked on a prototype with the city of Ghent in Belgium, where they started funding it from their taxes. And they started funding this social network we're building from their taxes. And the key thing being, that did not mean the city got to see what everyone was doing. It just meant they paid for it for their citizens. They were otherwise not involved with it.
That's so nifty.
It makes me think of this thing I heard on User Defenders with Jason Ogle. He had on Alan Cooper, and Alan was making this point of how we go down these paths where we reward CEOs for making money. We don't reward CEOs for necessarily doing the right things. And when if we could find some way to shift that, if we could pivot to maybe a more beneficial road for everyone, that's when we'll start making these big leaps, these big changes that are just so much more positive. I wanted to ask you, Laura, and I hear a lot of people talking about this, and maybe some people think it's kind of a silly conspiracy kind of thing, but do you, and I want to bring it up because I do see people bring this up on the Facebooks, the YouTubes. What do you think about people that cite that these things might also be listening to what we say, picking up keywords, and then using that? Like if we have a conversation about dog food and all of a sudden on a website I get a ad for dog food, like is that a possibility? Is that realistic? Or is that just goofy, or is that the future?
It's a bit of both. So if you have an Alexa or something like that, or you have some of the Samsung TVs, then they are definitely always on listening and transmitting back to those companies. That's what you buy it for, because you want it to hear what you're saying when you say, hey, Alexa, get me this.
Oh, why'd you do that?
However, there has been some scientists recently looking into this specifically because it's people saying, oh, well, I was near my mobile phone and maybe its microphone picked up me talking about this thing, this perfume I was talking about to my friend, and suddenly we were seeing ads for it. And actually what they found is it's highly unlikely that that is happening in the majority of cases. It's just that because the likelihood is that your friend will go away and search for it, or someone else who was within earshot went and searched for it. And of course, your device and the sites you're on often know your location. And so they'll often know your proximity to other people. So they'll be like, well, those people were in a room together. They may have been talking about this thing. This person searched for it. Oh, we'll send an ad to that person. That is a perfectly normal algorithm. That's the kind of thing that you will see happening. And so it will seem very spooky a lot of the time, but there's usually a reason behind it. I mean, in some ways that's reassuring. In some ways that's not reassuring at all, because it really does give you an idea of how much they know. If you think about the stuff you enter into search engines, like, do you want people knowing like everything that you're like looking up all the time? Because there's a lot of stuff that I put in there that I'm like,
oh, Brian would be in jail.
What?
I thought he was already on parole. What are you?
That's what I mean. He would get put back in jail.
Right put back.
I actually recently I switched to using a Google phone, an Android phone, the Pixel 2, and I actually was talking about something with a friend of mine that I was looking into getting, and I kid you not, 2 days later I was getting emails, and received actually 2 phone calls from companies for the services. Coincidence? I don't know, but still freaked me out.
I'm mostly suspicious of Google stuff, I have to say. Like, I generally would not use a Google device. I avoid using Chrome wherever possible, aside from if I'm testing my web development stuff, because
Opera.
Everything is designed to be data entry with Google. You buy a phone at a subsidized price because it's a wonderful data entry device.
Sorry, did you say Skynet?
Yeah. You can use Opera, by the way, since it is using the same backend as Chrome, and it's actually really nice. I highly recommend people check out Opera.
Yeah, their mobile app's really nice too.
Yeah,
they are owned by a Chinese company now, but
they are. Oh.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have to ruin everything?
Well, they're not interested in our data, right?
Yeah, right.
But it's I mean, so I use Safari. It's not great. Apple aren't great. They don't treat their employees, particularly in countries like China, particularly well. But they make the right noises about privacy. I use DuckDuckGo for search. That's pretty good. It may not produce exactly the same results as Google, but it's pretty good. There's a cool new one out called FindX. They're a very privacy-aware search engine, all about privacy. So these little alternatives are popping up.
What do you recommend for a Gmail alternative?
Well, given that I've always been someone who used Apple Mail, so I was just using stuff that plugs into a server behind it. But actually, I've been using Fastmail, and I've been using it for quite a few years now. They're based in Australia. They're really good. But it's and their web interface is really good, but it's not going to be the same as Gmail because it's not doing a lot of those things that Gmail's doing that are on one side very helpful and on the other side a little bit invasive. One of the big issues recently with Gmail was that they were giving app developers, so if you were using extensions with Gmail, access to everything that you were sending an email.
What?
So it's very useful if you want to have auto-generated replies and things like that, or useful adverts in the corner. But everything you're emailing, I get emails from my doctor. I don't necessarily want a company knowing that, especially a company that could then sell that information onto my health insurance company or something.
Yeah, it's weird. It's a weird balance. I mean, there's a convenience value to all of that. That's so nice. Like when I was using my Google phone, it was so nice that, hey, it knows I went here and it like recommended these other places. And then like a few seconds later, I'm like, wait, it knows I went here and is recommending other places. So it's kind of creepy. It's a privilege thing, I'm afraid to say. Like a lot of us working in tech, we're pretty privileged, and our information being out there isn't a massive risk to us, but actually to a lot of people, their information, they don't necessarily want to share things. People with disabilities don't necessarily want to share everything about their medical status with their insurance companies because they know they'll get penalized for things. If you look at the way the prison system in the US is using algorithmic profiling in order to decide who stays in prison, and you see the racial bias in that as well, and you think, well, actually, maybe I don't want my data contributing towards that racial bias, whatever race or background you are. And so because all of this information is being sucked up by technology and by algorithms that are designed by people who don't necessarily know what they're doing or don't necessarily understand the impact of what they're doing, it has very dangerous outcomes, even if it's wrong. It's like if the information they have about you is wrong. If you look at Facebook, you can actually see the terms that it has that it thinks you're interested in for advertising. I have some very strange things it's put in those terms. I mean, it's got some like fairly true stuff, like lives away from family is an example of stuff they have, uses Wi-Fi, uses a 3G connection. Like it knows all this stuff about me that you can tell is fairly easy to get. But then it'll put like random things that I've no idea about. I think it said I had an interest in time. I mean, but if you think of it, doesn't everyone?
They like to put you in boxes because that makes you easier to advertise to. It makes sense. But if it puts you in a box because it thinks it will make you easier to advertise to, but that classification could be used against you in the future, that's quite a dangerous thing. If it decides, actually, you seem like you talk to a lot of people who are protesters. So that makes a strong likelihood that you're a protester. And so when they come to pre-arrest people before a big event, which is something that they did in the UK, they did before the royal wedding, the big one, They pre-arrested people because they thought they were likely to protest, and they've been using it at borders going into the US as well. The idea of, oh, your social media is not looking particularly clean, we're going to give you some extra checks, and they're using all this stuff already. So we don't want that stuff being used against us.
Yeah, it's amazing. They're going to try to, I say they, I don't know, it's the lizard Illuminati. They're going to try to sell us into the thought of privacy being an antiquated concept possibly in the future. But, you know, speaking about accessibility, I feel like if we're getting close to the end, and I would be doing a disservice if we didn't get to your book, and I'd love to talk to you about it. It's the accessibility for everyone. This is an amazing book, and you also have an audiobook and you narrate it yourself. I'd like to know a little bit about it and why you wrote this book.
Oh, thank you. I wrote it because they asked me if I wanted to write it.
Perfectly good reason.
Because I'm not the kind of person who would necessarily put myself up for writing a book. But I wrote an article a long time ago for 24 Ways, the blog that's Rachel Andrew and Drew McClellan do before Christmas. And they do it every year. And I wrote a little thing about why bother with accessibility, because it's something I've always cared about. Like, ever since I was started out learning about HTML and CSS, as soon as I learned that tables wasn't the right way to do it, around that time, a lot of people were also talking about accessibility. And I think I just read the right blogs at the right time. And I just always thought, well, this should be a priority. And so I've always been picking up stuff about accessibility over time. And so when they asked me, do you want to write a book about it? I was like, well, I'm not one of the experts. Like, people don't necessarily hire me in to sort out the accessibility of their site. But what I do know is I know a lot of all the introductory stuff and the people you should be following if you want to know about the really like nerdy experty stuff. And so I set out trying to write a book that would bridge that would be an introduction to accessibility. That's why it's for everyone. That would work for lots of different disciplines in the industry. So it's not development specific. There's a lot of stuff in there about design and about copy and things like that. And that could lead people into the experts who are often talking about things that can come across as quite dense and difficult and confusing if you don't already have an introduction to accessibility. So I want to be the bridge for them.
I love that. I love in one of your talks, you also mentioned how you were touching on universal design and how developers are also designers because they touch all the aspects of this project or whatever project, what have you, that they also need to be, and possibly it's paramount for them to be thinking about these aspects.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, that's why I call myself a designer, but a lot of people will call me a developer as well, because I write code. And so, but I see that as part of trying to execute my design visions, because everything we do, every little thing we choose to do, like from the language we choose, how we mark something up, that's a design decision. That's a decision that is part of the core part of the design of what we're building. And so developers are making these decisions all the time, but it's very easy to go, oh yeah, but it's a development thing, so it's not design, so it doesn't. It's quite a good way of letting go of responsibility, I think, by saying, oh, well, this is just development.
I love that.
That sounds like hot drama too.
that is something that like I feel like we clash as designers and developers, is like, but is that accessible though? Like, I know that's a conversation we have a lot at my own job. I don't know about you guys at Start to Start, but yeah, we're constantly like, designers and developers are like, but like, is that accessible? But like, can they click that? But like, can you use tabs? I think that's really cool that you're able to, say, okay, it's everybody's job to, think about accessibility.
We really can all use it against each other. I think that developers could turn around and say, well, I've been looking at the hex value of this color that you've chosen, and actually it's very low contrast against the background, because that's a common one that designers like to do. Designers like low contrast text and tiny little text that's very hard for most people to read because it looks neat and tidy on the page, and so we think, oh, that's perfect, it looks nice and neat. So developers can turn around and go, well, actually,
I love EEE on CCC.
Exactly. And I've seen a lot of that. Apple used to be one of their footer that they used to be the tiniest, smallest grey text. They used to have things like recruitment information. So they'd have, like, if you wanted a job at Apple, there'd be a link there in the footer, and that's the only place on the page that would be. And you're thinking, well, are they only trying to find people that have really great eyesight? Maybe people that are very young to get that job, because they're not making it accessible to everyone, that's for sure.
I'm still angry they got rid of something looking like a button.
It's a real pain. Like, not distinguishing links and buttons is a big issue. Making things it hard to understand. I think some of the worst is making divs clickable. Like, we have plenty of HTML elements you can use that are lovely and clickable. Why do we have to do everything with divs and spans? Like, it's beyond me. You get so much goodness from using a semantically relevant HTML element. Like, that's one thing I think that a lot of developers, they're fantastic at JavaScript, fantastic at CSS. Why aren't they any good at HTML? Because it's a fairly straightforward language, and there's so much you could get from it and save yourself so much time in JavaScript and CSS if you really understand HTML.
Yeah. So what would you say is the buy-in value of the book? Like, what are, well, not even that, like, what are the core considerations that it focuses on in the book?
Well, it focuses on first understanding, like, a range of, like, people who could benefit from you making your sites more inclusive. And that's broadly focusing on things that make your site easy to see, easy to hear, easy to understand, and easy to use. So these are all kind of like common usability goals, really. But then under those brackets, you can help a lot of people who maybe are using a screen reader to access your site, maybe using keyboard navigation, maybe they need to use speech input on your site, or some kind of like switch or external button to access your site, or so all these different things. People with dyslexia, people whose second language is English, or whatever language your site is in, can help people like that. It can help people that are distracted, that aren't bothering to, like, that are kind of half using your website and half doing something else. There's so many different people that can be helped by making our sites more inclusive. And then I try to go through some of the simplest things we can do in the different disciplines for those things. So just things like writing good HTML, paying attention to the color combinations that we're using, making our text easy to understand and easy to read. Like, a lot of it comes from text. Just writing good, clear copy. It's great for everyone.
And I love that you did an audiobook for it. Didn't it? I thought I saw you on Twitter too. It took you a fair length of time to do the audiobook too, to go through the process. Wasn't it like close to 6 months or something like that?
Yeah, a part of that was because I kept doing it badly, because it's really hard and it takes a long time to read. Like, they're quite short books from a book apart. They call them brief books. But still, it's nearly 4 hours long, the recording. And it's easy to sit and kind of have a nice chat over like a podcast or something like that. Your voice doesn't get too worn out. But sitting there for hours reading something is really intense, and your eyes get a really sore throat. And also, I wasn't very good to begin with, because I was trying to perform it too much. And you don't want a performed audiobook.
You should have said, I'm going to do it all in one recording and just keep bringing the pints and just.
I was going to go with tea and money, but pints, okay.
That would have been great.
It certainly would have got more amusing as it went on if I did that. Yeah.
That sounds like a new. It sounds like it should.
We're doing so good at this. Go, Brian, your turn.
No, you go.
Is that towards the end of it, like, you probably would, like, you know, like the beer goggles, basically, if you're drunk, you'd have like beer ear goggles that would be fantastic. So I'm sure that would be you'd be like accessible, but for your ears, right?
Well, the last thing I read was the hardest thing to read, which is the list of resources in the back. It's essentially a list of links. So it's me trying to read out URL. Well,
serious?
When I went to record it, I was thinking, how do I make it so that the audiobook is useful without the rest of the book? Because there's some stuff like images, code examples and stuff like that. I can't reproduce those exactly. Like, could you imagine me reading like just even the shortest bit of code? It would be like open bracket, A, space, href equals. Like, it would be ridiculous. And so I had to try to find ways to make the audio more accessible, make it easier to understand if you were trying to just listen to the book without reading it.
Oh, you know what would be fun would be like giving out some small URLs to go here for this example.
Yeah, well, I thought about that, but actually I deliberately kept the code in the book to the smallest amount possible so that someone who was maybe a copywriter wouldn't open it and go, this looks too much or scary.
Did you have to read the code out?
I read around it. So I talked about it in a way that you could understand what it meant. But because I don't have loads of code examples in there, and that's what we would do anyway. A Book Apart, for their books that do have a lot of code examples, they link to things like code pens with code examples in and stuff like that, because no one wants to try and copy and paste code from a PDF of a book or a EPUB format. That's a nightmare. That's asking for invisible sort of characters everywhere if you do that.
No, normally I have a spotlight question at this point. I kind of actually want to spend a little more time, since we don't have a lot of time left, talking about accessibility a little bit more, like some resources, because I think this is an excellent topic, and it's something that isn't talked about enough, I think. I mean, we hear it more and more lately, I think, but I don't think that I'd like to hear some resources that you might recommend. I'm sure you spent a lot of time researching, and anything that you could share would be incredible.
Well, off the top of my head, one of the best things that I see is every week there's a newsletter by David Kennedy that's called it's Ali A11Y, the most accessible of all of the short names. It's Accessibility Weekly, or A11Y Weekly. And that's a really good email. And what they do, what he does every week, is he sends a load of resources, things that people have posted throughout the week, which is a great way of finding other blogs and other experts in the area. But it also has a specific section each week for people who are new to accessibility. So if you're just finding your way in, there'll always be something that's on your level that you'll find easy to understand, something you can act on right away, rather than things that feel a lot more intimidating. That's one of my favorites. I'd also say if you really want to get into the code side of stuff and you want some good examples of really like great accessible code, you want to look at Inclusive Components by Hayden Pickering. And he's got a website for it, and he's recently made it into an ebook as well, which is great. And it's got just really great patterns for all these different things that you do all the time on the web, and how to make them as accessible as possible. And it's a great, he wrote a book before about it as well. So he's got some really good stuff, and he's funny as well.
Yeah, didn't he do the foreword on your book, I believe?
Yes, he did. Yeah, he's a good guy, and I've learned a lot from him. So it was really nice having him do the foreword for me.
Nice. Well, hey, we're just about out of time, Laura, and we're gonna have to close out. And just really appreciate coming on. And we like to ask our guests one final question, and that is if you have any kind of final words or of wisdom or any kind of things that you'd like to say at the closing. Any advice for our audience?
Well, I wouldn't say I'm a particularly wise person, but what I'd say is it's best to always try to do the best you can for other people. So whether that's trying to make your site more inclusive, whether that's trying to find a business model that's ethical, it feels good to be doing good for other people. And you got to think about what you're doing for your future self and for your children as well.
It's very well said.
Well said, yes.
Well, what's the best way people could get a hold of you? Obviously, we'll add some links in the show notes, but for our audio listeners, where can they go?
Well, they go to my website, laurakalbag.com. I also have my own Mastodon instance, which you can find out about on my blog. But that's I'm Laura at mastodon.laurakalbag.com. It's a long username, but you get used to it. And you can find our work at ind at ind.ie.
Nice. Well, Laura, thank you so much for being on the show. Super appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it was awesome.
Yeah, a lot of great takeaways. Thank you so much. Well, hey, everybody, please remember, to go to iTunes, subscribe, go to thundernerds.io/review, send us a review, subscribe on the old iTunes. And what else, Janelle?
And definitely send us in some questions, too, for next time. That would be pretty awesome. We want to read your questions live. So that's a good one. Wait, did you have anything in mind, Frederick?
Patreon.
Oh, right, our Patreon. We were talking about Patreon earlier. Oh my gosh, I totally was like, oh my gosh, Patreon, we should totally do it. So yeah, we have a Patreon. Please, we would love your support and love and appreciation in the form of literally pennies and nickels if you need. Like, if that's all you can give, we're totally cool with that. And yeah, just love on us and we'll love on you back. We'll send you some really great content. And yeah, pretty cool stuff.
Thank you, everybody, for listening. Thank you, Laura. Really appreciate it. Hey, Alexa, subscribe to Thunder Nerds.